Hello, hello. Welcome back to my little interview series. And today I've got a very special guest. Today I've got Luigi Dallai with me. Luigi is a member of CNR, the Italian Geological Survey, I guess.
Research, yeah.
Yeah, and he's a researcher there. But Luigi is also very adventurous, and he has been serving on the Italian Parliament for 5 years. Is that right? So he was a member of Parliament in Italy for 5 years, and now he has returned to research. And I'm quite fascinated by this switch between being a scientist, being a politician, and being a scientist. The collaboration or interaction between politicians and scientists is not always as smooth as we wish it to be. So I want to use this opportunity to have a chat with Luigi about how his experiences in politics might change his way of doing science. So, first of all, welcome Luigi, welcome to Sweden, to Uppsala. And
Hi, Val. Thanks for this chat. Hi, it's very nice to be here and talk with a little talk here.
Great, then let's plunge in if that's okay
Yeah,
for you.
let's go ahead.
Okay, can you give us a few words about your experience in politics? I mean, how did you end up going into politics, and what have you learned?
Well, actually, I've been interested in politics for all my life. I joined the young communist community when I was 17, I think. And at the time, there was still the Communist Party in Italy.
Okay.
Now, I mean, there's been a kind of evolution about. And so I've been doing politics for all my life, or most of my life, because you think that by doing this, you can change things a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more than a little bit. And then, of course, I mean, during my studies, I kept on being interested in this. And of course, I mean, you grow up, you find a job, you get involved in different things, but the passion of doing politics and following things, or following social evolution is still there. So when I was about 44, 45, there was this opportunity to compete for a position in the parliament for my constituency, which is the province of Siena, about 250,000 people. That was a great experience. Of course, I mean, it's much different from being a researcher at the CNR or from being anything else, I guess. But yeah, it was very interesting. And I think I've learned how to deal with people you normally don't deal with, how to approach different kinds of problems, and maybe also how to get involved in things that normally you wouldn't be so much interested in, because our work as researchers is more devoted to singular things. I mean, very specific and very specialized. In politics is quite the opposite. So you're open to listen to any kind of problems, and so you have to learn a little bit of everything, actually.
I see. This is fascinating, I find. Can I ask you whether you feel that research actually has a real impact on politics, or whether politicians are looking at research as maybe more of a tool to get a means to their ends, if you know what I mean? Or can we as researchers actually make a real difference, politically speaking? What's your feeling about that?
My feeling was, maybe it's just a little bit more than a feeling, is that research is not really considered by politicians, because it's a narrow range. Actually, it's a narrow field.
Mm-hmm.
And also the community of people doing science, it's small if compared to, for instance, to people dealing with school education in general. Of course, I'm experienced about Italian numbers, but the people dealing with school and education, high school, middle school, primary school in Italy, I mean, sums up to maybe 8 to 9 million people.
Mm-hmm.
If you compare with the numbers of researchers, which maybe there are 100,000 people overall in the university and research community, you cannot compare the weight of one thing with the weight of the other thing. So of course, I mean, when you deal with strikes, for instance, of teachers, it's a different thing about strikes of researchers. I mean, the impact on the society is totally different. And of course, who's I mean, in charge of taking political decision, of course, is more. I'm not saying interested, but I mean, the interaction with big numbers is necessarily bigger than the interaction with the lower numbers.
Right.
Then we know that the research is fundamental for progress of the society. So I think we should struggle and convince the decision makers that research is the future, especially because we have to deal with some issues like global change, climate change, sustainability, which is something that you can deal if you have some deep knowledge of things. So this is a key issue, I think, in my view.
How good are politicians, apart from you having a research background, how good are politicians to actually listen to researchers?
Well, for sure, my experience tells me that they can be interested. But the other thing is that our language, how we pose things, I think I say we because I feel part of a community.
Yeah.
And I think I'm quite, an average researcher in terms of how I put things in a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Our vocabulary is it's different. We don't talk in the way we should pose things to a very wide consensus of people, because it's hard. Science is a hard job, and it's very deep subject. And as I was saying before, scientists are, especially in a specialized world as we are now, we know maybe everything, that to be extreme, we know everything 100% of one thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you do politics, you know maybe 5% of 20 things, or maybe 1% of 100 things. And so you have to learn how to explain things to a wide audience, and this is not trivial. It might seem trivial, but it's not. And my own experience was just striking when I was trying to talk about and explain how CO2 in atmosphere affects climate, affects our environment as a
Mm-hmm.
general.
Yeah.
And well, for us, maybe it's something obvious. Okay, you have CO2 emission increasing the ppm in atmosphere, so it's something that it's not completely natural. Part is natural, part is not.
Sure.
Part is anthropogenic, but still, everybody would think about CO2. Okay, CO2. We know what CO2 is.
Yeah.
This is not. It's not said 100%. You have to explain what CO2 is and how it behaves in the atmosphere, and every scientist more or less knows about the greenhouse effect. But if you go around and take some people in the street and say, can you explain me the greenhouse effect? Maybe they know the word, but they don't really realize how it works. They're not expected to know, and maybe they would, but it would be better if they were. But still, you have to explain in an easy way, and most of the time we assume that people already know what we're talking about, which is not true.
I see. So, and this is where I see an issue as well, because yes, you need to provide this information to a wider audience, maybe even to politicians, but this, of course, also leaves open the possibility for manipulation of this information.
Absolutely
And this
true.
is what I'm very worried, because if I had, I'm going to phrase it bluntly now, if I had politicians trying to explain to me how these things work, I would be naturally skeptical, because I would want to hear it from a scientist personally.
Of course.
But the wider population might not have this privilege to have access directly to a scientist, and then they will have to listen to propaganda in the wider sense that comes from different organizations. What's your feeling? Is
Well,
there?
let me interrupt you because
Sure.
let's make a very simple example. If you're in a meeting, a political meeting, discussing about finance, economy, and you're a geochemist, a volcanologist in your case, a geochemist in my case, I wouldn't ever think about raising my hand and say something dealing with the um, the markets, uh, how we should behave with the bank economy
Mm-hmm.
or bank policy. And if I make a mistake in my expressions, I would be uncomfortable on this. On the other side, and most of the people in this meeting maybe would be expert in economy, finance, maybe law. Let's translate this in a scientific meeting where maybe an economist would be, feeling to talk about climate change in 2 words and banalize this, making very trivial and putting words like, oh yes, we know this, but it's not true, maybe it's not sure, and putting things in a trivial way. That's how things, weight in a different way. The scientific knowledge should be treated as any other kind of knowledge, although it doesn't rule uh, the the politics of the world. We know the economy is more important than anything else, because it makes the rules basically, but it doesn't solve people problem.
That's indeed a tricky one because I understand that the economy has an impact on the daily lives of people,
Of course.
while of course climate change is something that's harder to grasp, and CO2 is not something you can directly touch. It's
course.
something that has long-term implications, and I think for the common person on the street, so to say,
But because
this
we're
is
talking,
tricky.
yeah, but because we're talking about what we are mostly interested in and what we deal with as a scientist. But let's talk about medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say the same about surgery, about vaccines? Think about vaccines. We had a big struggle in Italy dealing with the law making vaccination of the young kids compulsory to go
Okay.
to the kindergarten. And there was a huge movement of anti-vaccine
Uh-huh.
because they say this is something that is brought by big pharma, the industry, and so there's nothing good about this. You have to have the free choice of give vaccine to your kids or avoiding this choice. And the point is that this is a key issue for the society, because I have the freedom of having my vaccination because I feel good, but I don't have the freedom to put in danger the life of someone who is not as strong as I am in terms of my self-defenses,
Mm-hmm.
and needs to be vaccinated, and needs also me to be vaccinated.
Right.
So you have to think about how the information becomes important, not only on scientific things that we know, but on all scientific things that deal with the society and the progresses of the evolution of society. Because it's not that economy and and let's say the social decision can be taken in terms of money. They have also to be taken in terms of progress, safety, health, and social advantages.
Social security,
Social
in
security,
the
yes.
widest sense, and social welfare
That's
as well.
what
You
I
need to
felt,
have a
of
healthy
course.
population.
I'm not saying that one thing is more important than another thing. I'm saying that everything is very important, and you should take a consideration of several things. So the things that are more evident, and also the things that are not so evident because they're just known by a fewer number of people.
Oh, this is all very tricky. I see that there's a reason why I'm not a politician. So, can I ask one or two more questions?
Sure.
One question that kind of sometimes plays on my mind is politicians are in charge for a certain amount of time, and it takes also a certain amount of time to get some new rules kind
Right.
of through the whole system and get them approved and etc. And then, of course, you always have the risk of the following government wanting to do exactly the opposite of what the previous one did, and they might actually counteract some of the measures that were implemented. Is it an efficient process being in politics? Do you feel that you can actually make important, rapid changes if they're needed in society, or do you feel that, as I do sometimes, that politics is a very sluggish process and it's not a very stable process either? But maybe I'm wrong with my perception here. So I wonder how you feel about that.
I agree with you, and I feel like the process is not so efficient, but that's democracy.
I'm not saying that.
And
Yeah.
you have to to find a consensus of people in order to change society. The other way, we have, we know from history that's dictatorship,
Yes.
which is not probably a good alternative. And I think democracy has this kind of cost, but that's the only way you can have a good progress in society, and you can have peace, and a good state, a good healthy people. And
You're saying that the sluggishness of the system is the price
Yeah.
we need to pay in
Yeah.
order to actually have the possibility to voice our opinions,
That's-
be
yeah.
heard, and have this
I would
open
say this.
discussion
Yeah,
about
I would
things.
say
I see.
this.
Well, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. It doesn't reduce my worry about them being sluggish, but I take your argument here. So, good. I have one last question for you, if that's okay. So, now, having come from politics and being back in science, what can you take from politics? What have you learned there that will likely make your scientific work different or better, or you can use certain things that you learned to improve your scientific work, maybe to increase the impact or so? Is there anything, any tip you can give us other scientists who have not been in politics?
I don't know if it's a tip, and I don't even know if my experience can be, of any use for other people. But I would say that what we do has an importance,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more important than if it's understood. Of course, any scientist is focused to his own research, and most of the time we think that what we're doing is the most important thing. For sure, it's for us, but maybe it can be seen as a strange and totally separate things from the world, which is not, because any single advancement, any single scientific advancement is important for society, sooner or later, I would say. And my point is that let's think about, for ourselves and also for the rest of the people, if what we are doing can be understood by other people, and if people can give us some suggestions about how we do our things in order to be more spread over society. Because it's not necessary to reduce the quality of your science to make it easier to be understood. You can do very profound, very difficult things, but maybe you can use a language can be more accessible to the common sense. And I would think that that's the tip, because I keep on thinking that science, or maybe I think even more, the science it's really fundamental for our future. And I think on the same way that we have to convince, or I would say more to explain why, because we normally say that we see what we already know,
Yes, yes, absolutely.
and people would not see things that they ignore. So they have to be trained to understand things little by little, and this is also something that it's our due.
It's our duty and obligation,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
to make sure that our findings are transmitted to our customers, which is the population.
Yeah,
So,
and at the end, we get funded more or less. We get paid by our government to do our own research.
Mhm.
So I think we have to give back some knowledge to the to our population, to our nation. I think
Fair
it's-
enough, fair enough. Although this is, of course, also a challenge in a way. Talking to a scientific audience is fundamentally different than talking to a general audience. But no, your point is well taken. I think to maximize the impact of your
Yeah.
work, just looking at it from your own perspective as well as from a societal perspective, i.e., trying to improve something for the larger community as a whole, I think this is fundamental. Well, I hope that a lot of politicians think like you, but I'm not entirely sure myself at this point.
Me neither, but what can we do?
Yeah, we can only try and
And
hope.
then politics is it's a passion. So you never resign from politics. So you can resign from your job and you can take some breaks. But if you want to try to change things, that's the only way of doing things is doing politics.
So let me ask you just to close off. Would you go back again if you had the opportunity, if you wanted to?
I'm really happy now to be back in science 100%.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I don't know.
Okay,
But
well, time will
we will
tell.
see,
The
yeah.
future will see.
Yeah.
I realized that Winston Churchill had a pause of something like 10
Like-
years, and then he came back. So one never knows. Luigi, it's been a great pleasure talking with you. Your insight has been marvelous. I learned a lot, and thank you very much.
Thank you to you.
So then I say goodbye,
Bye-bye.
and thank you for joining us, and all the very best. Hope to see you soon.